as the people in Kursk are themselves learning for the first time, getting dragged into this war. People of Moscow are being sent a message that they are not untouched by the war next door and that it can come home to them too.
Now, Ukraine assaulted Moscow with drones last night in the biggest aerial attack on the Russian capital since the start of the war in 2022. It comes as Ukrainian forces continue their incursion into the Kursk region of Russia. The Times World Affairs editor Catherine Philp is in Sumy, the region of Ukraine from which the incursion was launched. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Hi, Ed.
I have to say, I completely missed this story about the drone attack on Moscow. I know that Ukraine has launched the odd drone at Moscow, but this sounds like a much more sustained operation.
Yes, 11 drones were shot down over Moscow last night, according to the mayor of the Russian capital, which would make that the largest drone attack of its kind. It was one of 45 drones that the Russians say were sent over their territory last night. Now, this obviously is unusual. Ukraine does send drones across the border and they've hit various targets, military and oil refineries, that kind of thing. But an attack of this size is kind of a new thing for Ukraine. It's worth pointing out that the Russians sent 65 drones in the opposite direction and hit Ukraine almost every day with missiles and drones. So I think you could frame this as Russia feeling a taste of their own medicine back from Ukraine at a time when its troops are on Russian soil as part of a ground incursion.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely the point, isn't it? It's not that they're not launching the drones at Moscow in order to take out strategic infrastructure. They're launching the drones to bring home to ordinary Muscovites that the war in Ukraine is coming right back at them, to put it that way.
We don't know what the targets of the drones are. The Ukrainians haven't commented on them. So, and when drones are shot down, it can be difficult to tell exactly what they were aimed for. Nonetheless, whatever they were supposed to be targeting, it will have had that effect. It will be signaling to people in Moscow, as the people in Kursk are themselves learning for the first time, getting dragged into this war. People of Moscow are being sent a message that they are not untouched by the war next door and that it can come home to them too.
This is the kind of thing, isn't it, that sits behind the West thinking about the use of something like the Storm Shadow missile, because obviously Ukraine could use it to take out supply lines to the front line, the Russia's front line. But they could also use it to attack high-profile targets like the Kremlin itself.
They could. I think that is unlikely, and I don't think that that's been certainly part of the discussions that Ukraine's had with its Western allies. Its point is that were any of its Western allies in this situation where they were fighting a war of this kind, they would not be fighting with a hand tied behind their backs, which is how the Ukrainians see it. They would be, any military planner would be trying to hit those supply lines. It would be trying to hit the air bases from which, these airstrikes and these missile strikes from on Ukraine from Russia originate. And so that's their point, that really, in order to win this war, they have to be able to employ exactly the kind of military strategy and use the weapons they have in the same way that any NATO member would do.
And what is the latest? You're in Sumy, you're right by the area where Ukraine launched its incursion. Can you update us on what is happening in Kursk?
Yeah, well, it seems that the Ukrainians have advanced a little bit further, whilst the Russians are apparently starting to try and mobilize troops from elsewhere. I mean, they've come under a lot of criticism because that area was defended by inexperienced conscripts. They now look to be moving some more experienced, fully trained troops from the southern and eastern front, perhaps on the second line of the offensives there against the Ukrainians. And obviously, this is something the Ukrainians have been hoping for, that the Kursk operation, as well as sending various political messages to Moscow and to Western allies, that it could also draw Russian troops away from those places in the east and south where they're under enormous pressure. What we know at the moment is that Ukraine has effectively trapped a group of Russian soldiers, number maybe anything from 1,000 to 3,000, between its a sort of kink in the border where they're on two sides, and then where the incursion into Kursk has happened, followed by the bridges over the river that it forms the northern boundary. What they've done is they've taken out the bridges there in airstrikes. The Russians have tried to throw pontoons over that river to resupply those troops or reach them, and those again have been bombed. So it's got quite active in that area. And we do know that, again, one of the Ukrainian tactics there is to capture as many Russian soldiers as they can as prisoners of war, in the hopes of exchanging them for their own forces that are held in Russia, and indeed using potentially that piece of land that they're occupying as a bargaining chip in any negotiations.
Ні, я перевернув тобі.
Щоб далі приїхати. Не падало.